Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. There's, in terms of hypothesis, is a social annotation program that lets you and students annotate web content most broadly. Now, the way we do that depends on which version of hypothesis we use. And for practical purposes, we can think of there being two versions of hypothesis. The separate standalone version that's usually used from a web browser, that's usually used to annotate external content and to tag it and to record it and to share that. And then there's another version which is embedded in Blackboard, which is used primarily, which is under the instructor's control, which is primarily used to annotate documents that the instructor assigns to students. And let's talk a little bit about each of these, and then we'll choose a focus based on what people are most interested in. So hypothesis in general is used to annotate the open web. It lets you embed discussions right in a document itself. So if you have a blog post, or if you have a news article, or if you have a journal article that that's either on the web or that's stored within the LMS, students can go in and they can add comments to it. They can post questions. They can respond to other people's content, other people's questions, and so forth. And they can also embed videos, they can embed images, they can embed links, and they can provide feedback to each other. And the annotations, if you're doing this outside of the LMS, the annotations could be set to public, which means they're available to everybody. They could be set to private, which means only you can see the annotations that you put, which is useful if you're doing some research and you just want to make notes on something for some future project. Or they could be restricted to a group. And if you want to use the external version of hypothesis, not the one embedded within Blackboard, you can create a class group for students that will allow them to share resources with each other and share annotations with each other, but only with each other. And once you found documents you want to annotate, you can create tags. And some instructors have used this as a way of identifying certain components of arguments, for example. If you want students to identify different parts of a document as being different components of arguments or structure, you can do that by just having them tag it with different tags. Or you could have them classify the type of argument that appears in a document or a blog post or some type of argumentation. In terms of what types of arguments are being used, or you could just create tags for your class based on concepts that are relevant for the class that you want students to find some resources on and be able to easily share them. And it's often used in this way through curation. If you want students to go out and find resources and share them with each other and possibly comment on them, this is a really useful way of doing this. And that was supposed to probably be analysis, and I probably made a mistake. What? One more time. Okay, so let's try that version of hypothesis first. This is one I created last year, actually, and I'm going to have to log in myself. I usually have this automatically logged in, so I'm hoping that I remember my password, and it seems I may not have. Let me see if I've got it here. I went through all of this last night on another computer where my password is saved, and I probably haven't typed it in over a year, but I'm using a different computer at the office where I apparently do not have hypothesis password saved. It has been that kind of day today. So what I'd like you to do, just to try it, to experiment with though, is go to hypothesis, which is hypothe.is, and okay. And my username, let me use my username just to be safe. It's just John Kane. There we go. Okay, so that should do it. And I'm going to put an invitation to the group This was a workshop I put together last year, and these were tags that people used. So I'm going to go to edit this group, and I am going to, yeah, I know. So I've got hundreds and hundreds of passwords. But let me find the URL to share here. And this, when you create a group, it creates an invitation link. I'm going to put that in the chat. And so what I'd ask you to do, just to try it, is without that X there. One more time. I hit the Command key and X at the same time. So if you click on that, if you have a Hypothesis account, it will prompt you to join the group. If you don't, it will prompt you to join Hypothesis. And once you join Hypothesis, you can then join the group. Okay. So I'll give everyone a minute or two to try that. And then what you can do is, if you're going to use this on your own, you can add the Hypothesis plugin to your browser. It works with Chrome, with Firefox, with Edge, and I think it even works with Safari. Is that working? Any problems? Okay, yeah, that's right. You do have to get that activation email once you sign up. It should come through pretty quickly. Well, while we're waiting for people to get connected to it, I should have sent that out before, I'm sorry. Let's just go to a website. Let's say we want to do some, let's go to scholar.google, and let's say we want to do some research on, let's say interleaved practice. We want to find articles related to that. And here's one, the effects of interleave practice. So there's a PDF out there. And so if I want to annotate it, all I have to do is click on Hypothesis right here. It'll take me to that page. And now, because I have it plugged in, or I could do it right from the website, let's say I want to just tag this. What I can do is I can, let me find something I want to annotate here. Well, let's just say I want to make a note of all these things. I'll add an annotation there and log in. Okay, apparently I have to log into this app as well. And there we go. Okay, and now if I want to cite these, so these are the effects of annotation on motor skills. Let's say I just want to make a note of that. I highlight it, and here I can make a note and just say links to interleave practice involving motor skills. And now this becomes a link that is going to have a misspelling in it. Okay, that I can now post to this group because I've already logged into this group. So I'll just post it. And now that will be shared with everyone and it will have that link. But what I also could do though, is I could also add some tags. So let's say I want to add motor skills and I want to add interleave practice, let's say, and press return. So you can type in multiple words and press return, and then that will be part of the tag. And now if I click on that tag within the group, it will take me to this article as well as any others that use the same tag. Okay, so now if I go back to Hypothesis and I refresh the screen, there'll now be a new tag here that will have interleave practice. It must not be one of the top tags. Oh, well, here's the article in any case. And you can see anything that has been tagged by anyone in the group that has been shared with the group. So this now gives me a link to the article. I can see who's annotated it. There's a URL if I want to go back and visit it, and I could look at the annotations in context. So if you want students to go out and find examples of something, you could send them out, find things on the web, find articles, have them tag it, and then share it with other people. And then anyone else who wants to come in here can annotate this. So someone else can come in and they could reply to that annotation. And they would do it by just clicking on the reply. And so you could have annotations. You could get a whole discussion thread going within a document just by annotations to the annotations to this. And each annotation could serve as a basis of a new thread within that discussion. And again, if we want to leave a response to this, you've got options of adding a link. If you want to link to other resources, you could quote some of the material. You could use mathematical typing, inserting LaTeX if it's a scientific paper, or you could put in a bulleted list or a numbered list, and so forth. And I think you can also embed images. Yeah, you can embed images as well by just putting in a link to an image that you have in some location, which could be an image out on the web. I'm going to cancel that. So this will show all the annotations on the document from anyone within the group. But if I wanted to share a link to this more generally, annotations are things within the document. If you just want to link to the page, so if, for example, you just want to keep track of this article, you could just add a page note right here, and I can click on this. This will be an annotation for the whole document, which is separate from markup within the document. And I could put in an annotation for interleave practice here for the document as a page note. And if I choose to, I could make this, well, because I'm within the group, it's only going to be the workshop or me. If I had chosen at the beginning a public comment, then it would have gone public. But here I can either leave my own notations or do it within the group at this stage. If I'm using Hypothesis, I'm not saving them within a group. I'm usually just saving references for my own use. And as long as this is installed in your browser and don't let the login expire, it's right there. So if you happen to see something that you're interested in, let's say we go to the Oswego site. And let's say we go to the Oswego SELT site. And if I want to see Hypothesis comments there, I can click on it and see if anyone has done anything in Hypothesis about this. And there's no annotations in the group, but I can change it from the group to make it, these are other workshops I've done or classes I've used it in. I could look at public annotations, and there's no public annotations on this either. But if I want to, I could create one. So I'm going to create a public annotation by going here and saying, this is the homepage of the center, well, of, let's just say SELT at Oswego. And then if I post a public, that will now be a post on this page that anyone visiting the page with Hypothesis open will be able to see. And so you could annotate things and share those things publicly. And there's often groups of people who will do annotations across the country where there's a particular theme where they'll go out and try to find things. Liquid Margin's a group that is run by Hypothesis. It's a website and blog, but they also run discussion forums and they'll sponsor readings. And they'll have groups of people read a text or read a document and annotate it and provide feedback to each other. So this is one way you could use Hypothesis either individually to keep sort of like annotated bookmarks, which is very similar to what you might do with Digo or something else, but you also have more options for sharing publicly with a specific group or just keeping it private for yourself. So is everyone in the group now? Yes, no? Okay, Emily is? Okay, so try this. Just find something on a topic, annotate it, and then share it back to the group. Or if you're on this page, you could always go in and see where the links go by just clicking on them. So, if you want to see, well, I created 10 within this group. Other people created between 1 and 0 last year. But if we want to see something, say on, on social annotation, we could click on that and it will show the articles on it. And then we could go to that. Here is a Grandview University page, and you could see the annotations in context. And then you could provide feedback on that if you wanted to. This shows up when you're in Hypothesis on the sidebar, and you can just expand it or contract it. And this would be the Grandview University page on social annotation. And that's Grandview has some good people there in their Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. Particularly Kevin Gannon is there, and he's done quite a bit of work with syllabi and other things. And here's their website on social annotation. Yeah, and in fact, Kevin created the site. So that's a really quick introduction to Hypothesis. How's it going? Any questions, concerns?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
This is Laura Donnelly from English and Creative Writing. And I apologize. I think you talked about this and I just missed it. So you were just mentioning we could add a page to the annotations there in the workshop. In order to do that, do we need to have the
plugin? No, you don't.
Thank you. Okay.
You shouldn't need to. You should be able basically to, I usually use a plugin, so I'm a little bit rough on that, but you should be able to, when you're in the group, directly open. So if we're on this page, we could I'm trying to remember how to do that. The easiest way is to get the plugin, but
Laura and John, I think I might have found how to do that just on the Hypothesis homepage.
Okay.
There's a place where it says paste a link at the top.
Yes. Okay. I was one page down. If you paste the link in, you go there and so forth. Exactly. So, so if you find a page, you could go to the main Hypothesis page, paste it in, and then click annotate. So let's say we want to annotate the economics department page. I think that's just this. We may have to put in the whole thing or not. Yeah. And now we get the annotation sidebar from within the browser. And you could follow links through and the annotations would be through there. Thank you. I would have fumbled a bit before I got back to that. And again, if you want to annotate the text of something, you just highlight it and then you bring this back out. And then you have the option of annotations. You can either just highlight it just so it's marked in yellow for future reference for anyone in the group or for yourself, or you could annotate it, or you could just leave a page note if you don't want it tied to specific text on that website. Excellent, thank you. So any other questions on this? And this is free. Students have to create their own accounts. And it does get a little bit clumsy because as you noted, there were two things students would have to do. They would have to create the Hypothesis account and they would have to join the group. And then that often led to problems where they join Hypothesis, but they didn't get to the second part of it, which is joining the group to share things. The other thing when I've tried using it in classes, which has been a little bit frustrating at times is that it normally defaults to just private annotations, and students have to remember to turn it to the group annotations if they're going to share things with the class. Some people did that immediately and followed the instructions. Other people would take a couple weeks sometimes to get them to remember to always share the annotations with the group rather than privately. Alana.
So when you're actually sharing it, you make it public, but you also make it public with your group, right? Not like everybody, or is it just?
Well, there's two steps. There's two options here. One is when you do the annotation. Let's say if I want to annotate this here, if I want to do an annotation here, I would click on the annotate button, and then I would. Apparently, I got logged out again. I'm not quite sure why, but if I wanted to annotate, let's say this, I would click annotate, and then you have the option either public or only me. You have to join the group before you can leave the annotations, which is why students would often have those problems, you see, because what they'd have to do is they have to go up here and choose a group before. So I'm going to choose it for this workshop. And now once I've done that, it gives me the option of posting it to the group or just to me. And now I can leave an annotation for the group. So this is SUNY Oswego economics, which actually should have been a page note rather than an annotation. So let me fix that. So as a page note, I can create that page note, paste that back in and post it to the group. And now it's there. But by default, when they log in individually, it will either be private to them or public, which would make it impossible for other people in the class to see it unless they go to the top first if they're using the browser-based version of it and choose the group for that session. Once they've done that, it'll stay there, unless they switch to another computer. But it's easy to make that mistake and to save it either publicly to the whole world or to save it just to yourself when you intended to share it with a group, either a subgroup within the class or the whole group. So does that make sense? Any questions on that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it keeps, it logged me out too, and then it kept losing my group. So even though I joined the 2022 group or whatever that you had, I had to log back in and out. 2021, sorry. I had to log back in and log back out to get it to get. So that's something, I guess, to tag myself and tell students, hey, you got to do this.
But that's if you're doing it from the browser interface. If you do it from the browser plugin, that will tend to stay on for weeks or months at a time.
Oh, okay.
As long as you're using it regularly. I'm not sure how long it is before you have to relog in, but it stays for a while. And if students are using their own computers, they tend to do that. And that reduces it a little bit. And it tends to stay on the group unless they intentionally switch to something else. So it's a little problematic and it takes a bit of adjustment, but that's not the only way to use it. You would use this version if you want students to be going out on the web and finding things on their own. If you want to guide their path, it's a whole lot easier to do that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hop over to, well, first, any other questions on the public individual version of Hypothesis? Okay, I'm going to jump into Blackboard now, and I'm going to show how you can use this in a different environment. In particular, I'm going to choose one of my spring classes where I did use this quite a bit. And the way in which I used it is students were working on a book project. And in this book project, they wrote documents in small groups in Google Drive. And then periodically, those drafts were uploaded as PDFs into Blackboard. And then other groups gave them feedback on their chapters to that point. And then this process continued several times, and it worked really, really nicely. I normally wouldn't share content except for the fact that students have already released this content as a Creative Commons product. So we'll just take a look at the final version. This is where they were doing discussions on specific topics, but somewhere in here we have their final drafts. well, I guess maybe the second draft is, that might have been the last stage of this. So each one of these is a document in Hypothesis that other people can annotate. And specifically, these are all, well, let me go back one step. We have embedded in Blackboard the ability to add hypothesis links within Blackboard, and all those complications about students joining a group, installing a browser plugin, and everything else just simply goes away. Because when you use Hypothesis within Blackboard, it automatically creates a class group, and everyone in the class is automatically a member of that group, and anything they do within Hypothesis then is shared with everyone within the class. They don't have to create their own accounts. They don't have to authenticate their email address. They don't have to remember to select particular groups, but they're restricted to only sharing things within the class, which for some applications and for my use worked really well, because I really wanted them only at this stage to be able to provide peer review on the work that other people were doing. So let's say one of the chapters they were working on was on income inequality. And so this was one of the groups of 3 or 4 people here. And one of the things I did to allow people to make it easier for me to see what people were doing is I had them color code the text. I didn't want them highlighting it, but this particular group did that. It was just a way of seeing who contributed which parts of the document. I discourage them from doing a highlighting, but that didn't quite work. But in any case, what happens here is these are the feedback that other people left to each other. Okay. And so, you know, let's say we go to this comment, there's where that particular comment was. And here's someone who's suggesting that maybe they should take inflation account as part of this response, and so on. So this was a 43-page document. It was a pretty long chapter in this project. And basically, they wrote a draft. It was saved as Google Drive. I saved it as a PDF, uploaded it to Blackboard, assigned it the name of the chapter, and then different groups were assigned every other iteration, every other week, basically, to provide feedback to a different group of other authors, basically. And so there's a whole series of annotations here within Blackboard. So this was probably an ugly example just because of all the highlighting. Let me see if I pick one that's a little bit different. Here we go. Did they do, I guess maybe this class, a lot of people did. In any case, they were supposed to just change the text color. Just, this doesn't make it quite as visible. But in any case, here's how it worked. Now, what's probably best, though, is if we hop out of here and go to the community group where we can actually demonstrate how to do this without messing up with that class. So in Blackboard, in the CELT community group, if we go under content, there is a section here which is called Hypothesis Workshop. And these were just documents that I grabbed, or links that I just grabbed to illustrate this. But I'm going to take an example. Let's go back to, well, let's say we want to use Kevin Gannon's page on social annotation, and you want to assign that as something for students to annotate within your class. So I'm just going to grab that URL, and we'll need it in just a minute. And I'm going to create a new content, and you get it within whatever folder you want to place a hypothesis assignment. And let's say we want to add, well, we add it as a hypothesis assignment. So you scroll down, you add a hypothesis assignment, you give it a name, and let's just put this as tools for social annotation. By Kevin Gannon. That's going to be the title that will be displayed. And that's all you need to do at this stage, other than clicking on submit. You can choose enable evaluation. I generally didn't, but if you want to assign grades directly from within Hypothesis, you could choose yes. I did it in a somewhat different way, but we'll get back to that. And so now I have created a hypothesis link, but it's not linked to anything. But I saved the URL, and you create the link first, and then you choose what it's going to link to. And here you have the option of entering a URL of a web page, a PDF from Google Drive, or a PDF from OneDrive. And I'm going to choose into the URL of of whatever is on the web, and I click submitted, and now it becomes a hypothesis link. And what happens is that now anyone in the class gets this little sidebar automatically without joining hypothesis or doing anything else. And they can now go in and just annotate anything by just clicking on annotate and typing, well, example. There we go. And by default, it will post to the class only. You have the option of doing it individually, but by default, it goes right to the group and it's there. And now if any of you go log into Blackboard, go to the community group, go to the hypothesis folder, you have a series of documents that were uploaded either just now or in past workshops. Let me find one other example. If we go back to, let me just pick one other site to show you how to upload a PDF. Let's go back to Google Scholar, and we can see if I can find that same document again. I could go into Hypothesis and find it, but let's say I just want to take this and I want to download it. So I'm going to download it directly to my download folder, and I'm going to save that. And this is, I'll just grab the title for now. Normally you have a more complete annotation. I'm going to go back to the folder here, and I'm going to create under build content a hypothesis link. And I'm going to just type that name, or well, paste that name in. And then I probably should put the authors, but I have to look that back up again. Click submit. And then I would go here, click on it again, except now I could put in a URL for that, but because I've already downloaded it, what I can do is I'm going to choose from Google Drive, even though it is not yet in Google Drive. I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to choose my account here because it's a college account. I'd normally do that. And I would go to upload, and I would select a file from the device. And because it's the most recent upload, it should be right there. It should be right up at the top of my download folder. Now it will upload the document, and it now becomes an annotatable PDF right within Blackboard. And this is really good if you want students to comment on a finite number of things where they're not actively searching for content, but you want them to annotate something. People have used this for discussion forums, and students find it a lot more engaging to have a discussion right within the document itself, rather than a link they had to follow before they start the discussion. And people who have used this have generally noted that students tend to have a much more detailed and a much more in-depth discussion going on when they're directly engaging with a document than something they might have skimmed over before they logged into the discussion forum, because they're directly interacting with the text and able to respond to each other within the context of that, which pretty much forces students to engage a little bit more with it than if they just skimmed through something, or maybe just read what other people posted and didn't skim through all that much themselves, because they're already right there. It's kind of hard to avoid engaging with the text when you're annotating it right within that, you see? So I found it really helpful. Every week in the capstone course, I've given students journal articles or working papers to discuss. And before they actually present these things in class, they're annotating them and raising questions and giving feedback to each other during the week. And then when they're working on the projects, they're providing feedback to each other directly within the document and marking it up and making suggestions and so on. So, I mean, there's other ways of doing that, but that's worked really cleanly. The first time I tried having students give peer feedback to each other, I let them use the comment tool within Google Docs. But one of the things that was happening is I was grading them both on the quality of the feedback they were giving, as well as on how they responded to the feedback. But what was happening is that when a student saw that there was notification that someone had left comments, they would often go right in, sometimes at 1 or 2 in the morning, and respond to it and resolve the comment. And that record was lost unless I went back and restored an earlier version of the document before it had disappeared. And that was just kind of tedious. So this has been a much more fun way of doing this. So what I'd suggest is just try this, log into the CELT group and work on annotate any of these things. And again, it could be a URL or it could be a PDF. Now, you could link to videos and so forth, but videos you can only do page annotations on. If you can link to an image, but you can only do page annotations there. There has to be a text layer in order to do it, which means basically HTML text or PDFs are pretty much the only source for materials for editing. And of course, it has to be an accessible document with a readable text layer to be able to annotate the text. So if you just take an image scan of a PDF, that's not, you could have page annotations, but you're violating accessibility standards as well as, not providing anything that can really be annotated. So that's a really quick overview. Any questions, thoughts, reactions?
I have another question.
Sure.
Sorry, this is Laura again. So we'll be moving off Blackboard to Brightspace. Do you foresee Brightspace having a similar interface for hypothesis, or is that in the unknowns at present?
I can say safely that hypothesis works with desire to learn. Where things get tricky, there's two areas where things get tricky. I was able to convince CTS to pay for hypothesis for the fall and now again for the spring. It's right now, I think it's like about $2,000 per semester or $4,000 for the year. At the level we've been using it, we've actually have room to grow. We could pretty much double use and still stay within that. So for $4,000 a year, it's not very expensive, but budgets could be tight for CTS and they might choose to stop funding it. But perhaps even of more concern is that SUNY is moving towards the shared environment for desire to learn, where they want the interface and the set of tools to be the same for students at each and every institution. And the question is what tools they will allow. They don't want people using different versions of video interfaces, for example. So they will probably move to Panopto or to the other one that Panopto just bought, because those are the two that are most commonly used. We have both of them here. One of them will probably go away and it'll probably be the other system because most people have been using Panopto. So the question is, will our SUNY overlords think that social annotation tools are useful? I know a lot of people there use hypothesis, but those are not generally the people making the decisions. Most of the people engaged in the decisions have little or no knowledge of pedagogy or evidence-based teaching and so forth, which has some of us really concerned about this, because if there's going to be one interface where everyone either gets a tool or no one does, then one of the concerns is we might be constrained because community colleges are much more constrained in their budgets than four-year systems and community, comprehensive colleges and universities whose budgets tend to be find it easier to pay for these resources. But the other thing that's not known is to what extent they will provide one common resource, but then individual institutions get to opt in or not. What many of us are hoping is that we'll still have an array of tools and then institutions can choose whether to join the contract or not. They're doing this for two reasons. One is to make it simpler for students so that they don't have different sets of tools if they're enrolled in multiple courses as part of that whole SUNY Online thing and transparent transfer, so that students could take courses from Oswego and Albany and Buffalo and OCC and so forth, all within one course shell. So they just log in once to the SUNY instance and all the courses would be there no matter where they're from, and all the tools would be there no matter where they are. But the question is, will all institutions have access to those tools, or will that be decided by institutions individually? And that is unknown. The stage that they're at is 4 weeks ago, they asked institutions to provide a list of the tools that they're currently supporting, and they're going to go through and narrow that list down and try to find some commonalities. I have no idea. In other words, I'm hoping that this is done. And the more people we have using it, the stronger the case we can make that this should be considered as a tool. Now, because it wasn't clear that we'd even have this for the spring semester up until about 4 weeks ago, I requested that they install another tool, which is Perusal, which has many of the same capabilities. And there's going to be a workshop on that, I think on later this week. It might be Thursday, I think. But in any case, Perusal has the advantage of being free, at least at the scale that we're using it. And so that might be an easier way of doing some of these things. The capabilities and the way it works in practice are very, very similar.
What you said.
So
Sorry, could you say that again?
my phone is trying to talk back to me. Sorry. Or my watch was asking me to say it again. So I think so. I think we'll have one of these tools. If you use one, it's not very difficult to use the other. One difference is Hypothesis works with the open web, and it's basically storing links to documents out there. When you upload a document, like as I did with a PDF, it does store it in your Google Drive, but students are doing the annotations only here. So Hypothesis does not actually own the documents. It basically just contains links to them. When we upload something, it's in our Google Drive. Students don't directly access it. The program does, and the annotations are stored. The only thing stored in the Hypothesis server are the annotations and the links to the document. In Perusal actually was created by Eric Mazur, as well as a few other people a few years ago as a startup. And what it does is it stores the actual documents there. But in practice, it looks very much the same to students. So you'd have a Perusal interface, you would upload things to Perusal, they'd actually be stored on the Perusal servers, and then annotations would be made there. One advantage of Perusal is that it also allows you to create annotations on audio and video files. So if you have, it includes an audio player for like podcasts or a video player where you can pause it at any point and leave annotations in the timeline for the video and the audio, which is a nice feature that is not available in Hypothesis. On the other hand, Hypothesis is used very widely. It's by far the most common social annotation tool, but Perusal has been catching up. For example, Cornell recently switched to Perusal. I believe Syracuse is using, I'm not positive on Syracuse. Vanderbilt University has switched from primarily using Hypothesis to using Perusal, partly because of cost and partly because of some additional features. The way that Perusal funds itself is they work with textbook sellers so that they also are an interface for textbooks so that you can buy your textbook through at a slight discount from Perusal as an e-text, and then they're getting funding from publishers. So they're trying to essentially cut into the publishers market in a way similar to what we do with our direct access to courses, where we get somewhat discounted versions to the e-text, but students read it not through the publisher's link, but through Perusal, which provides some nice tools telling us how much of the document people read, how much time they spent with the document, and it does give some alerts and indicators telling us what students are engaging with and what they're not, and how often they are. So it does have a little bit of an early alert system built in, but it also it's a funding model which is a bit different. Hypothesis works only by contributions from individual institutions, and Perusal is perhaps taking a cut out of publisher shares. But it will also allow you to upload your own documents. So anything that's open source, anything that's Creative Commons, you can upload and there's no charge for that. So anything you've created, you can upload. You could upload PDFs, but there are some copyright issues. Like what I just did then isn't quite legitimate in terms of copyright because I just uploaded something from a journal where they maintain the rights to that. Now, if it's a preprint, it's perhaps a little bit more questionable, but you do run into all those issues. Neither Hypothesis nor Perusal actively enforces that. So in some ways, linking to documents on the web is much cleaner in terms of copyright issues because you're just linking to public documents and annotating them. You're not actually redistributing them in the same form. So there's that. But so my students have loved this, and I know everyone who we've had Hypothesis actually for a couple of years. I was able to negotiate a year's worth of free use out of this because I've worked with some of the people there and partly from the podcast, and also because it was being used as a test case for SUNY, where there's 2 or 3 other SUNYs now who are in their pilot phase this year. So they gave you a free semester in the pilot. Since we were in the midst of a pandemic, they extended that a bit as well. And so now we had to pay for it though for the fall and again for the spring. So that was a really long answer, but I think we'll have something. I hope we'll have something, and I'll do everything I can to make sure that we have something, both at our local level as well as at the SUNY level. So, because I am on the advisory board for SUNY as a whole in terms of their DLE implementation. Other questions or comments? Is it everything working okay? Any questions? Has everyone been able to annotate these documents or other things?
I have a question.
Sure.
If you find that, your whole class of students is annotating a single document, does it ever start looking cluttery?
It could. Many of the documents they were annotating were pretty long, so that wasn't much of an issue, but you could always break them up into groups, and then you could have one version of the document for group 1, another version for group 2, another version for group 3. And you can, you could even create group spaces in here and only have one set of version of those available for each of the groups. It does require a little bit more work because you just have to upload the document separately and probably give them a different file name as you did that, just to make sure it wouldn't cross match that. And then just make the links available only within a group folder. As long as you just make the folder accessible to the group, and then you'd have links to specific copies of those within the group, and that would cut down on that, I think. I haven't done that because I've only used this primarily in classes, my smaller seminar class, which generally has like 30 to 40 people in it. So it hasn't been that bad. But I don't think I've ever had the whole group editing a single document. It's normally like a third of them annotating specific documents. So when I do the peer review at different stages, groups 1 through 3 will annotate the documents created by groups 4 through 6, and groups 4 through 6 would do 7 through 9, and groups 7 through 9 would annotate 1 through 3, and then that would keep rotating through the semester. So at the next stage, they'd edit a different set of groups and so forth, mixing up a little bit. So that kept the numbers down a bit. But I think using group folders and different versions of the document should allow you to do that without getting too much clutter in the discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I've recently moved, well, in the past couple of years, to having my creative writing students share all their work digitally and comment on it digitally. And that's mostly through putting through like discussion forums on Blackboard. I know some of my colleagues have used Google Docs to have kind of shared annotation on a Google Doc. And so in this case, I'm not we aren't annotating websites or PDF. These are PDFs necessarily. They're just documents the students are creating. Do you think that if you were to choose between Hypothesis or Google Docs for something like that, do you see benefits for one versus the other?
The first time I did one of these book projects, I actually did use, because there were some issues with, we didn't have the installation working within Blackboard for the first 7 or 8 months after I asked that it be installed. So I did use Google Docs. The main concern I had there is I had folders for each group that was shared with the other groups. And so that basically I had group folders within the folder that was shared with the whole class. And to make it easier, I let them, at a certain date, I told them to freeze their editing and make a copy of it, and then to post that in another folder where it was let's say the first draft of everyone's documents. The problem I had was that when students were notified that someone else had left a comment, they would go back in and they would resolve the comment, which would eliminate both the original version and the annotation, which made it really hard to track the participation of each group. So what I did, I still had them work in Google Docs, and I still let them share the work with others, so there could be informal sharing and each group could see what the other groups were working on. But what was happening, what I did basically is I just, at the due date or the time when they were supposed to have it completed, I just made a copy of their their work at that point as a PDF. So if you're within a Google Drive folder or you have the document, you just choose to save it as a PDF, upload it in Hypothesis, and that's where in my class each one of those files were the stage at the second draft of their project. And the nice thing about it is that locks in the editing as of that due date for that draft, and no one else was able to undo the annotations of other people. So it worked kind of, I liked it. It was a lot cleaner for me in being able to see how many annotations and how detailed they were and what sort of feedback each person was providing. And also, let me see the original document as it was, rather than something that was continuously evolving, because that was a problem I had in Google Drive. I got around that by, again, saving them as PDFs in Google Drive and letting them leave comments on that, but that got kind of messy too. So,
yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
So I found it really clean, and students have found it pretty intuitive. And it's much simpler than using Hypothesis outside of the LMS because the group's already created. They don't have to log into anything else, and it's all kept within the class. So it's a bit simpler, I think. Other questions, comments, suggestions? Well, what I suggest is play with it. Try it, see if it's something you might want to use. And, if it is, you can present on it next time. A lot of people have been using it very extensively since they first tried it. And our levels of use have been steadily rising each semester. And I've not seen anyone try it and go back to not using it. Again, it's only been 4 semesters. So yeah, 4 semesters so far because we started in the spring. But people have been generally pretty happy with it. Okay, well, I should stop this session and to get ready for the next session, and have a good day. Any last quick questions? Okay, well, I will stop the recording and head out.
Thanks, John.